What if the most terrifying experience of your life wasn't random? What if that moment when you woke up and you couldn't move, felt a weight on your chest, and sensed something in the room was actually something women have been experiencing for centuries? They call it the Night Hag, they call it the Mare, Kanashibari. I've actually experienced it twice. And what I learned years later changed everything. Welcome back to Women on the Brink. So, in today's episode, we sit in a space between folklore, the nervous system, and lived experience. We're talking about Inoculous. And I just want to say this up front, this isn't theoretical for me. I've experienced something twice that I just can't explain away, but I can understand what it was trying to show me. So, what is Inoculous? Across different folk traditions, there's stories of presences that don't come for the strong and grounded. They come when someone is depleted or overwhelmed, maybe emotionally stretched, but also energetically open. And women are the ones who show up the most in these stories again and again. And that's not because we're weak, but because we're often the ones holding everything together, long past the point where we should be. And I think we're often the ones who are also more energetically open. So in folklore, Inoculous isn't random. It enters through the cracks, and stress creates those cracks. So in European folklore, they call it the Night Hag. This is a presence that sits on your chest while you're frozen and unable to speak. In Newfoundland, here in Canada, people still say, the old hag sat on me. And in Scandinavian traditions, it was known as the mare, which is actually where the word nightmare comes from. And in Japan, there's a word for it. It's called Kanashibari, which translates to being spiritually or physically bound in place. Different cultures, different language, but still very real. So both times this happened to me, the setup was pretty much identical. The first time I was 20 something, and the second time I was 40 something. Both times, though, I was completely exhausted and run down and just not fully myself. And both times I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, wide awake, not groggy. I wasn't dreaming. I was fully awake. And there was this heavy pressure on my chest, like something physically pushing me down. And I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And my partner was right beside me, but I couldn't even call out to him. And then in front of me, there was this figure. In my case, it was dark and it was hooded and had male energy, very similar to what you'd imagine as the Grim Reaper. And I know how this sounds, but what I really want to be clear about is this. It felt completely real. Nothing symbolic, not dreamlike. It was real. There was a presence in the room that wasn't a part of me. And then, eventually I could move. And the first thing I did was wake my partner up, both times. We searched the entire house. Of course, we found nothing. But the feeling didn't just disappear. I slept with the lights on for a week after that, both times, because something in my system had really been shaken. So, so here's the turning point. Years later, I was at a healing circle with a group of acupuncture students. And there were all kinds of practitioners there, different modalities, different perspectives. And during a break, I told a Hawaiian healer about these experiences. And she listened, and then she said something that completely changed how I understood it. She said, Chris, ask them what they want. And the moment she said that, something sort of clicked for me because I realized I had been experiencing this as something happening to me. But what if I wasn't powerless in it? What if I had more agency than I thought? So I left the circle with a completely different feeling. There was no fear, but a readiness. Like if it ever happened again, I wouldn't freeze in the same way. I would meet it. And I don't talk about these experiences often. I mean, mostly because of the way they sound. But last week I mentioned it in a Zoom group, and someone immediately said to me, that's the Inoculous experience. So naturally, I went to the research rabbit hole, and let's just say, if I'm crazy, I am part of a very large global group. Now, this is where we ground it a bit, because there's another layer to this that matters just as much. What I experienced maps exactly onto something we understand in physiology. It's a state where the body's asleep, the mind wakes up, and the nervous system is temporarily paralyzed. And then you add stress and exhaustion and a highly sensitive system, and the brain can generate extremely vivid hyper-real presences. Pressure on the chest, inability to move, and a figure in the room. So, which is it? Is it folklore? Is it the nervous system? Is it something energetic? Because science can explain a lot of it, sleep paralysis, stress physiology, nervous system overload, but it doesn't fully explain why these experiences often feel conscious, interactive, or even intentional. And across cultures, people report presences that seem aware of them and respond to attention or even communicate in subtle ways. They sometimes come with sound and even smell, so it's very sensory. And as I said, I felt it myself, the pressure, the figure, the undeniable sense that something was there. Whether you call it folklore, energy, or just a part of human consciousness that science hasn't figured out yet, the experience is really, really real. And validating it doesn't mean rejecting science. It just means holding space for both measurable reality and the mysteries we still have to understand. So here's my answer. It really doesn't matter whether it's folklore, nervous system, or energetic, because the conditions that create the experience are the same: depletion, overextension, lack of boundaries, and a system that is pushed too far for too long. And this is the part that I care about the most, because whether you interpret this as a stress response, an energetic opening, or something we don't fully understand yet, the message is incredibly clear. You're not meant to live in a state of constant depletion, because when you do, you lose your sense of control, and your body takes over, your mind fills in the gaps, and your sense of safety gets compromised. So for me, the biggest shift wasn't the experience itself. It was what the healer said. Ask them what they want, because embedded in that is power. And it shifts you from this passiveness to being engaged, from fear to curiosity, and from feeling frozen to being responsive. And that applies far beyond this kind of experience, to stress, to anxiety, to overwhelm. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? It becomes, what is this asking of me? So, how do we close those openings or the cracks? Because if stress creates the cracks, this is about closing them up. So, I'm going to give you 5 suggestions. The first one is just to come back into your body. Grounding is never optional if you're sensitive like I am. The second thing is stop overriding your limits, because our bodies will get our attention eventually. So that's your physical limits and your emotional limits. The third thing is reclaim your sense of control. So even in uncomfortable states, we have way more agency than we think we do. The fourth thing is build energetic boundaries, because not everything gets access to us. Not people, not stress, not even our own thoughts, not the night hag. We all get to choose, okay? And then the fifth thing is get curious instead of afraid, because fear freezes and curiosity moves energy. Now, I'm not sharing this episode to scare anyone or even to open myself up to judgment. I share this because I think many women have had experiences they don't talk about, moments where something felt weird or off. and we're too ready to dismiss them, and sometimes they're just too strange to even explain. And instead of exploring it, we tend to shut down and dismiss it or maybe even gaslight ourselves. But maybe there's something there, not something to fear, but something to learn from. If you've ever experienced something like this, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not powerless. I'll see you next time on Women on the Brink.